opening communication, it essentially took a lot of the power away from the gangs who completely depended on that lack of communication, lack of trust to ensure that they weren't prosecuted when they pretty much owned that territory.
Well, thank you all very, very much. I have a couple of questions, and then if maybe other members of the panel do too. I'm really impressed with the recurring theme that's been here throughout this afternoon about relationship-based policing. I think that's a very good way to put it. And the emphasis on positive leadership and selecting officers for their commitment to doing that kind of policing. So my question probably as much to the two chiefs as to the officers is, how do you do outreach and recruitment to try to select for those factors? And what do you think about the training that police officers get? Does it adequately prepare them to do this kind of work?
Okay. Yeah, sure. You know, recruiting a diverse workforce, screening for the personality traits, folks who are comfortable in their own skin, who really have a sense of community and building up community is really where it all starts. And then within the organization, you have to promote what you want. So people who can demonstrate the ability to problem solve, to engage others, to work in partnership, to be good team members are the folks that you promote. And then you also have to have strong policies, guidelines, procedures, directives, and you have to hold people accountable when they step outside the bounds of what you want. Accountability starts with corrective counseling, but and or training and reinforcement. But that can lead to the progressive disciplinary track if folks aren't getting it, because in every organization there's going to be a small number of people who for some reason just come off the rails, and they have to be dealt with swiftly but honestly, and of course according to due process. So I think that you have to have folks in higher positions of authority and leadership that also model that behavior that they want folks to carry out on the front lines. And by no way do I think that we have it all figured out. In fact, we are hosting some training in about 2 weeks at our department for every department member. Fortunately, because of our affiliation with the Department of Justice Violence Reduction Network, they're funding fair and impartial policing training. Dr. Lori Fidel and her staff are going to come out and put our officers, our department, through that training. So we understand that it's important to build on and to reinforce the kinds of behaviors that we would want to see in our police officers.
And absolutely right on the mark, Chief. And one other element of that, the culture and the ethical leadership that I spoke about, starts at not only our level, but is representative of every level of the organization, including frontline supervisors and police officers and deputy sheriffs. It's a culture. It's a passion that you've heard here today from all of us about how dedicated and committed we are to serving our communities. But that front line, that first line of defense starts on the front end with respect to your hiring standards and screening for those, the biases and prejudices that none of us want in our organizations. So finding the most qualified, well-trained peace officers to serve in our communities that are reflective of those communities is where we will achieve our greatest success.
Did you want to say something?
Well, I think they really talked very well about the basic police officer and getting them in and getting them trained up and the compassion that's necessary. One of the key things that I tried to do from the training perspective, when new officers come into Southeast, which is about once a month, we have an orientation. And during that orientation, we bring members from the community leaders, the people that we used to go head to head with, to come in and meet with the officers in the roll call, in the community station, and to have about an hour-long conversation between the community and their expectations of the officers, and what the community very much fronts the officers on what their expectation is in coming to that community. And I think anytime you go face-to-face, you start building those relationships, and it's a very important part of that training to kind of combat the necessary training that officers get that is necessary, unfortunately, sometimes for them to stay alive.
I'm wondering, Chief Brown, if you could talk a little bit about Project Ceasefire in Richmond, and if you believe that it's been effective, and how that works in terms of feedback that you get from the community.
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. So our ceasefire program is modeled after the Boston ceasefire model, and essentially it is a structured program that involves partnerships with police and justice community members, as well as community stakeholders, to focus on the most violent gun offenders in the community, and to basically call them in, as it would be, and give them this presentation by justice community and community members and stakeholders standing shoulder to shoulder, to give them one really simple message, which is the shootings have to stop. And in order to help you get out of a life that's involved in these ongoing cycles of gun violence, the community is here to guide you to alternatives to get your life straightened out: education, GED, job training, spiritual counseling, any number of things that folks who are young repeat offenders might need to get out of a life of perpetual crime. And then the other half of the message is, if the shootings continue, then you need to know that because you're here today, you're not anonymous either. So law enforcement will target you for criminal cases. And that's essentially the message. And then, but the message is not just you, but you or anybody you're connected to on your team. And so we had a couple of instances where we did call-ins, and then there was a conflict between the two, and then we focused on folks and went out and made arrests and did search warrants and did criminal cases to show that we were serious. I think nationally about 20% of folks sort of opt out or take advantage of services, and that's been roughly our experience. But you know, the other component is that you have to be ready to go in and do targeted enforcement. And this is not really different from our general approach to building relationships. So it did take a while to get a more cohesive and smoother functioning relationship with all of the partners on our ceasefire program. But we're there now, and I'm happy to report that. But also, it's a way of law enforcement really focusing on the right people, pinpoint strategies to deal with people who are active and committing gang crimes right now, because the nature of murder in Richmond, the overwhelming majority are gang involved, which essentially involves you know, high-powered weapons used in public places, you know, to target other folks. But sometimes, you know, those strays have unintended consequences. And so we feel like over a series of a couple of enforcements, because ceasefires were broken, we feel like that sent a pretty strong message to folks involved in gun violence that we were really serious. And then what it also did is it built a higher level of trust within segments of the community where trust would be harder to gain, because we were true to our word, but also, you know, our special investigations division detectives are the folks who lead this. But I mean, they also developed relationships with, you know, gang members and folks involved in crime to treat them with dignity and on a human level. But, you know, but if it was time for enforcement, then enforcement happened. And this has grown to a partnership where there's regular communication about what's going on and who does what, where the working group really is actively involved in trying to prevent future violence. If any shooting happens that could be gang-related, the working group knows about it immediately, and they start not only communicating to folks, but whatever they hear, they report back to us as well. We've even had the ceasefire working group for one or two folks that were wanted, pretty serious gun offenders, them actually arrange a surrender between the folks that were wanted and the police. So we feel like that's a little bit, unique, different, but a very, very strong and powerful partnership that has really helped us put a serious dent in violent crime in Richmond. In 2013, we had 16 murders in the city. That was a more than 30-year low. And then last year, 2014, 11 murders in the city. So that's a dramatic change from the average of the mid-40s every year.
Thank you. Yep.
Yes,
Councilman John Sawyer.
it's good to see you, Sheriff Christensen and Deputy Sheriff Brown. Just need to let you know that the Ceasefire One program is something that we're going to look at budgets of 5. I haven't told Assemblymember Lackey yet, but we're looking to hopefully fund it in the Cal Grip program. So I just gave him a heads up.
Is that statewide or just in LA, if I may ask?
Well, it's the Cal Grip program, so hopefully it trickles down to the appropriate people. My question is for the Tengaridis, because I work with Connie Rice, and she mentioned you. And I actually have 3 questions. And 2 of them is because I want to just verify whether or not it's urban legend. Plus, a lot of these stories don't get out, especially the good stories with LAPD. And I would like for you to repeat it, not only here for us in the committee, but also for everyone in the audience, that when you change the way you police, you get some unintended consequences that could be very, very, very good. And so I just need to verify. One was about Christopher Dornan, and when he went on his crazy rampage against officers, it's my understanding he was going to try to go and kill a former captain that he used to have, and he was going after them. And the Bounty Hunter Crips gang, which is your natural adversary within the Nickerson projects, I believe they wanted to help. The other story, which I saw in the LA Times, I saw somebody in a bathing suit with 2 African-American males next to them. And I guess they had been orphaned. And I guess someone from your unit also was adopting them or thinking about adopting them. And then my third question, you need to verify whether or not these stories are, at least give me the straight poop of what really happened. And then the third thing is, Connie talked about funding you, Connie Rice, getting it off the ground, ensuring that the officer is there for 5 years so that there's some continuity, looking at the way you do policing in a different way, giving you incentives for keeping people off the street, getting kids out of gang, and that's how you get paid, and that's how you get your attaboys, by doing that more so. But where are you now? As far as, that was 5 years, so as you started in 2011, we're here now. Will you continue to be funded? Do we need to worry about whether or not this program starts to wane after so many years?
I'll take the first one, since I was the chair of the Board of Rights that heard the Christopher Dorner case. And yes, it is true that he was after, quite clearly, Randy Kwan's daughter, who was killed by Dorner and her boyfriend just a couple of miles from our house. We had neighbors who had seen him surveilling our house that same night that he killed them. And he did, in fact, threaten us in the manifesto. When we got word of that, we got all 6 of our kids together and went to the house and remained there until he was ultimately died up in Big Bear. It's a very controversial thing, and there's a lot of thoughts on what happened, why it happened. I was only one little part of that heard the evidence that was presented and made a decision and a recommendation to the chief of police. There's a lot of urban legends, as you say, that as to some of the things that went on or some of the relationships that were there, and they are exactly that, urban legends and not truthful.
Okay.
We got a lot of attention from a lot of bloggers who put out absolutely false and misinformation. Unfortunately, in today's social media, when somebody sees it written on the internet or in a blog, they believe it to be true. And many times, the writers themselves say they don't really know anything about it. They just know. And unfortunately, misinformation gets out and it's generally believed. But that, thank God, is behind us, and all of our kids are safe, and it brought our family much closer together. And so I will now let Amada answer the other two.
I will clarify, though, there were several community members who called
Yes.
my personal phone from the community and made it very clear that we would be protected and we had their support. And some wanted to just come out and stand guard with the cops. And so I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
And the second part to your question is, yes, the CSP program began in
The 2
2011.
young boys that were in the newspaper with,
That is definitely an urban legend.
okay.
Yeah, I'm not aware of 2 little boys, and I'm aware of a lot of officers that are assigned to our program that have adopted
That's what I meant.
children.
Adopted children.
We have partners in nonprofit organizations, a woman by the name of Tay Collins who adopted her son from Jordan Downs, and he'd run away and go back to Jordan Downs, and the officers would help her find him. We have one of our football coaches who, a baby was abandoned in the park when he was 9 months old, and now fast forward a couple of years later, the same officer is coaching him in the Watts Bears program and found out that he was a little kid that was abandoned in the park that he rescued several years ago. And we have stories like that go on and on and on. We've had officers buy glasses or pay for dental work for some of the kids and families that are in the public housing developments. A lot of things that are occurring that we don't necessarily bring to the attention of our department, because we truly have officers that love the families and the communities that we're serving now. So lots of different stories are going out there. One of the other rumors is that the officers are being paid or getting incentives to do this type of policing. That is absolutely false. The Los Angeles Police Department is paying the base salary for all of the officers that are assigned to this program. There is no additional funding that goes into the program as it relates to the base salary of the officers. The funding that does go into the program, which is provided by the Housing Authority, it's $1 million program for 5 years. We're in our 3.5-year mark right now. The officers are paid overtime, cash overtime, which is covered by the Housing Authority. And all of the officers that we selected that interviewed for the program were upgraded or promoted. And that was to give them the incentive to want to continue to work in the community and to get the buy-in that this is a leadership position. You got promoted to be a senior lead officer like Officer Zuniga here, who is in the CSP program. He's assigned to Jordan Downs. And someone says, oh, I don't have to work the gang unit or vice to get promoted. I can work community relations and get promoted. So the Housing Authority also paid for the promotion, which was anywhere between 3% and 11%. The base salary is provided by LAPD. The remaining of the funding, which is a little over $300,000, goes right back into the community. That is how we fund our Watts Bears program. That is how we created the first ever Watts Girl Scout troop in Watts. That is how we are able to provide stipends for at-risk youth to do tutoring and to do step study and recovery and all of these other programs that we do with CSB. And we are now we've been extended till 2019.
Okay.
Housing Authority is 100% committed. We have not had a murder in the public housing development of Jordan Downs since August 28th of 2011. Between 2000 and 2011, we had 70 murders just in Nickerson, Jordan, and Imperial. Since the inception of our program, we've had 5 murders, 4 of those 5 murders were solved within 2 weeks because of the information and relationships that our officers have built with the community inside and outside the public housing development. The remaining of that 5th murder, we know who did it, and we're still trying to put the case together, and we will solve that case as well.
Thank you. We are going to have to move on because we have one last panel. I have. Okay.
I did just want to make a comment because we hear negative stories all the time, but I wanted to share something positive, and that was my interaction with one of my sheriffs, Adam Christensen, a few weeks ago when I had a very elderly woman call my office, and she had someone who was going to visit her house that evening who was going to help her invest some monies that I believe she'd already given part of the monies to him, and he had indicated that I, the senator, had a check for her to the tune of $250,000 that I had not handed over to her yet, and that I had canceled a meeting and so on and so forth. And she was planning on confronting him that night when he came to her home, and I was very, very concerned about what that confrontation might lead to, especially after learning that he had served time in prison. So I contacted the sheriff, not knowing what to do, and he had an officer at her home that night at 8 o'clock to be there when the other gentleman came out there. And so I think it really averted what could have been a problem, and we expect our local law enforcement to handle things like that up to the much more serious and violent situations. And I did have a suggestion with this, and that was that in my own community in Stockton that faced bankruptcy in 2012, we lost many, many officers because of that, and we had an attrition rate that continued to grow, and so we had a very new a new department with very many young people, and we had a crisis situation that happened where we had 9 murders within a 54-hour period of time, and we called CHP, and they were able to lend some of their officers to assist with doing some of the reports that were required on the murders and so forth, that relieved some of the officers within the department to be able to triage all the crises that were coming at them at the time. It wasn't a permanent need, it was a temporary need, and CHP filled that role. They filled that role a couple of different times. I know at that same time, the Oakland Police Department had some very desperate needs too, and it would seem to me that if we could find a way to provide a little bit of extra funding to CHP to be able to triage and help provide temporary assistance to communities in times of need like that, it seems that that would be a good solution, because it certainly worked in my city where we were facing a tremendous crisis.
That's a good suggestion, and I think we'll consider it. I have one last question. I realize something that urban legends touched off in me, because I've been told this actually by researchers, none who are here today, but other professors and researchers. And I'm just wondering, for these 3 departments, are there now, or have there ever been, quotas for stops, or an indication that you have to have a certain number of stops to sort of enhance your reputation in the department and your chances for moving up? Because there is a theory out there that that will lead to more traffic stops, more pedestrian stops, and that with our very stringent drug laws, you're likely to find a joint or something on people, and then that would be something that would be carried forward in a way that might not lead to public safety.
I can tell you that I've been with the Los Angeles Police Department for 35 years, and I've never been told a quota. However, there is another term that's used, it's called productivity. And because there's only it's hard to judge if people are getting a return on what you're being paid for, the term productivity is used. We are, and most of the time I've worked in very violent areas, and we are encouraged to go out and look for constitutional stops that fit into the crime picture in areas where there is a lot of violence. And it is somewhat controversial in the communities that we work in. And I think that I think it's something that law enforcement really needs to take a look at how we do it, when we do it, and why we do it.
Thank you.
If I could just ask one really quick question, I think it's very short, but it's very important. Do you folks think, and anybody can take this, do you think it would be helpful to have an improved or at least a supplemental degree of training when it comes to dealing with mental illness, people with mental illness?
I'll take that one, and the answer is absolutely. In Stanislaus County, we have a 40-hour CIT course, Crisis Intervention Training. That's a partnership between law enforcement, our mental health care providers, and many other stakeholders in the community. We believe it is absolutely essential and critical that our frontline deputy sheriffs and police officers have the tools and resources they need, the knowledge and skill and ability to de-escalate situations involving those who need or require mental health care.
Yeah, I think that we're going to, training, preparation for the job is something that we're all extremely interested in looking very closely at next year. We tried to tie some of the law enforcement money to mental health training last year, and we got a lot of pushback on that. Earlier today, we heard that training really hasn't been evaluated, virtually any kind of the training that we give our officers. And it is a very interesting subject. I would like, though, both Chief Brown and Sheriff Christensen to answer the question about quotas or productivity, because it's of interest to me in terms of police-community relations.
As long as I've been in law enforcement, 25 years now, quotas has never been part of what we do. We certainly encourage our deputy sheriffs to be proactive, but that proactivity means that you build the relationships in the community like you've heard today. We're all very passionate about that. And the only way to, again, adequately or appropriately police a community and promote a healthy and safe community is to have those relationships. And that means we want our deputy sheriffs out actively, proactively in the community, not only working on problem-oriented policing, POP projects, community-oriented policing, but we want to make sure that our victims get the justice they deserve. And that means we have to work with them too. So proactivity means that you're out actively looking for criminal activity in an effort to adequately protect your community.
So we've not ever had a quota for stops. But as we've evolved, we've redefined, what being a productive police officer looks like. And it involves a mix of things that absolutely includes enforcement. I mean, there's real crime that still happens in Richmond. This is not mission accomplished for us. But it has to be folded in with building the right relationships. And we really want our folks to be in a place where what they do with their self-directed time, when they're not on an active call, to be guided by not just crime data, but also community priorities. And so what we promote is good outcomes, a good mix of different kinds of things that police officers get involved in to help them to develop and to grow and enhance their own skills.
Thank you. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Senator.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And next, we have the panel from a community leader perspective. If the panel would come forward. We have Alice Huffman, the president of the California State Conference of the NAACP. Pastor Bryson White from Pico, California in Fresno, and Jeanette Zanipatan, the legislative staff attorney for the Mexican-American Legal Defense and Education Fund, MALDEF. Welcome to the committee, all of you. Ms. Huffman, would you like to kick off?